And they kept saying "Senkyoshi desu ka? Senkyoshi desu ka?" And I was trying to, like, in my Japanese at the time, "Rugakusei desu, rugakusei desu." And then when I realized what Senkyoshi meant, I'm like, no. Konnichiwa, what's up everyone? My name's Ben Norton. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, America, and I work here in Tokyo as a study abroad student coordinator at a university. And I would say manga and anime were always in the background. Personally, it wasn't the #1 thing that drew me to Japanese language and culture. Really, it was the writing system. I've always been fascinated with writing systems and languages, and the Japanese language was just so unique. It's a completely different ballgame from any other language, especially when it comes to the orthography or the way the language is written. So that was the #1 thing that drew me to it. But growing up in the 90s, you know, you got anime and manga everywhere. Pokemon, Yu Yu Hakusho, Yu-Gi-Oh, Toonami on Cartoon Network. And so that was always something I could talk about with my friends. And then my friends who are interested in anime and manga, I could always insert the Japanese language aspect as well. As soon as I got off the plane, the very first time I came to Japan, the excitement built up. And there were a lot of things that surprised me. Hearing the language everywhere, hearing how it was used. People seem to be a lot more excited over here in the reactions. A lot of strange intonation, a lot more bowing, and me just trying to kind of play monkey see, monkey do, and observe how people were behaving and trying to copy that. But there was a lot of things that surprised me. One, right off the bat, it was a misunderstanding, but the first time I came to Japan, I was so excited coming off the plane, I immediately had to use the restroom. And upon doing so, I was using the sink, and on the sink there was a button, and on that button, it looked like a soap dispenser, but it had the hiragana osu written on the top. Well, I'd been learning Japanese since then, so I understood osu as the noun, which means vinegar, but I didn't understand that osu meant press. So my very first impression of Japan was that instead of using soap, they used vinegar to wash their hands. And from that point, I was completely disoriented and always on my toes trying to understand what was going on. But I soon learned that osu was actually the verb to push, and in this case, not necessarily vinegar. What I like about Japan, first and foremost, is the food. I know it seems like a surface level thing, but Japan's a very gastronomic country, especially Tokyo. There's so many great restaurants. But underneath that, there's so many cultural concepts that I'm exposed to every day that I was never really made aware of in my own culture, just ways of thinking. A huge thing that I love about Japanese culture is the work ethic and how they don't demean other jobs. There's kind of a rhetoric in America where if you don't work hard, you end up working at McDonald's. And I never really liked that because it demeans people who work at McDonald's or work maybe other service jobs. And they contribute to society just as well as anyone else. And living here in Japan, they don't really judge you necessarily by what you do, but how you do it. And that's something I've certainly shared with my friends back home as a way to kind of perceive how we, contribute to society. Well, there's plenty of things I dislike about Japan, but I kind of view Japan like a partner. And just like any human relationship, you have to get to the point where, do I want to change this person or do I accept them for who they are? So there's many things I dislike about Japan. One, there's a superficial aspect when communicating, especially on first contact. You have to adhere to what's called social pleasantries, shakojire. And that kind of creates a barrier when you're communicating. And coming from American culture, where I have a tendency personally to be very open right off the bat and share what's on my mind, how I feel, as opposed to maybe hiding that under some set phrases. So I've never been a big fan of having to adhere to those formalities, especially when speaking. And just the amount of time it takes to build relationships here in Japan. In America, I might meet someone for the second time and use the terminology, they're my friend. But here in Japan, it takes a while for me to get to that point with people and have them open up to me the same way I open up to them. Well, basically my #1 goals here in Japan are improving my competency in Japanese language. I work about 70 to 80% completely in Japanese, and all my coworkers are Japanese. So in order for me to, improve in my job, first and foremost, I have to improve my Japanese language ability. And that just comes from more exposure to the language. I must admit, speaking Japanese from, 9 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night, all day, by the time I come home, I don't really want to listen to too much Japanese, but I know to overcome this, ironically, I have to listen to more Japanese at home and just build more exposure. And through that, I'll learn a lot more about the culture as well, which will obviously be very beneficial and practical moving forward. Some of my favorite ways to study Japanese are watch Disney movies that I've seen already in Japanese again. Of course, I love Japanese content. Anime and manga is a great way to study Japanese naturally because you're learning about Japanese culture as well. But I also like to learn about how Japanese interprets my Western culture and then translates that into Japanese. And because I've seen these movies already, I understand the context, and I'm not only able to learn new words themselves, but in what context they're used. So that's probably my number one favorite way to learn Japanese. But then, of course, just by talking to people and learning, about their life and about their work and things that interest them, and being able to share that knowledge, with other people by learning the vocabulary to express it. Well, some of the advice I would give to people coming to Japan, of course, it depends if you're coming for work or if you're coming for, just a quick visit. But either way, you want to keep a very open mind and be very observant and not necessarily react to everything that's happening to you. The first time I came to Japan, I had a knee-jerk reaction to everything. I would get flustered, or I wouldn't understand something, and I would immediately start asking about it while it was occurring. And over time, I realized it was a lot more beneficial for me to just simply observe it, not necessarily react, stay as neutral as I can in the situation, and then later ask my Japanese friends about it, or try to read about what exactly happened. A specific example might be when I am working in Japan, especially, people seem to be very hasty. It's called being sekkachi. And for example, if we have a visitor to our office, all of my staff will kind of run around very quickly, giving tea to the guest and guiding that guest maybe to a different room, but they're very pushy, it seems, or very rushed. When I had to translate in those situations, especially for foreign guests, it made them feel very uncomfortable. So there were many times where I had to tell the guests that they're being hasty in a way to be respectful to you, and then as well to my Japanese coworkers that maybe this cultural aspect that's really important to Japanese guests might not be as viewed as culturally valuable to foreign guests as well. So the first time I experienced that, it was very, very frustrating. But over time, I was able to kind of observe why that's important, and over time, I was able to tell the guest that this is a way of them being respectful, and it's just something to observe. And now I'm not so much as frustrated by it because I can expect it, and I know it's not that big of a deal. Do I feel excluded working as the only foreigner in my office? Well, something I'm very fortunate to have in my office are a lot of coworkers who are very culturally competent. Working in a study abroad office, naturally a lot of my coworkers have studied abroad, and even though we conduct most of our work in Japanese, there are times where I communicate in English as well. So in my specific experience, I haven't experienced anything that made me feel uncomfortable or made me feel alone as the only foreigner, because I really have a sense of camaraderie among my coworkers, and that we're kind of in the same boat, especially when it comes to communicating cross-culturally. I have to communicate in Japanese for a good portion of the day, and they have to communicate in English for a good portion of the day, especially when it comes to correspondences with other universities. So I've been very lucky that I haven't necessarily felt outcasted. But sometimes when I work with other departments, I do feel a bit of that difference. I'm very fortunate that I started learning Japanese at a young age. And so even though there are some language difficulties, that's not my primary problem, where it might be for a lot of other foreigners here in Japan. Regarding different work hours in Japan, certainly as an ALT, there's a different classification. And working as an English teacher here in Japan, I know it can be a little difficult, especially when it comes to the language aspect, because your coworkers are speaking Japanese maybe behind your back, and then when it comes to you as a teacher, you might not really understand where they're coming from, and you feel that separation. However, in my experience working as an administrator in the university, they speak to me in Japanese, and I'm expected to speak back in Japanese. So therefore, we're on a pretty even playing field, and so I don't necessarily have to worry about that cultural aspect. When it comes to the working hours specifically, my university is very, very ethical compared to a lot of organizations here in Japan. And our human affairs department will actually email if they think we're working too hard, which is counterintuitive. A lot of companies will have HR departments that will email you to say, work harder. Culturally speaking, most of my coworkers stay past 7. Maybe a little bit later, but that's not an organizational thing, that's just a cultural thing. Their parents did it, their relatives do it, they're just inherently kind of hardwired to work longer hours. There's a lot of reasons for that. One simple reason is that after World War II, when Japan was kind of in economic turmoil, to rebuild the economy, they wanted to do their very best to create the best society that they could, and they didn't want time to be a factor. So they worked 24/7 as long as they could to rebuild the economy and rebuild the society, because if they failed, at least time wouldn't be a reason for that. And of course that culturally has been passed down to other generations. So it's something I'm cognizant of, but I don't have to work past 5 if I don't have to. And I've never experienced a situation where my coworkers made me feel bad for leaving home at an appropriate time. But I'm very fortunate. I love my job, and there are times where I work a little bit later because I'm kind of in the mode to be as productive as possible. And at that time, I like working late with my coworkers. So in regards to some of my most awkward moments in Japan, those naturally came the very first time I studied abroad in high school. I went through a great organization that had given me a lot of reference material in preparation for going to Japan, and they said since I would be studying abroad at a high school, I should wear some generic uniform, basically navy blue pants and a white shirt. So that's basically most of the clothes that I packed. I packed some t-shirts and jeans and stuff like that, but I was prepared to go to the school. So my very first day of school, I get there and I notice everyone's like in casual clothes. Everyone's wearing jeans, all the students are wearing like t-shirts and everything. And up until that point, I'd been in Japan a few days, I'd seen students wearing school uniforms. So I thought maybe I'm at the wrong school, or it's like a special casual day or something like that. And of course I'm dressed in my navy blue, pants with my white shirt. And I go into class the very first day and they thought I was a missionary. They didn't think I was an international student. They thought I was like trying to promote some like religious beliefs or something like that. And they kept saying, "Senkyoshi desu ka? Senkyoshi desu ka?" And I was trying to, like in my Japanese at the time, "Rugakusei desu, rugakusei desu." And then when I realized what Senkyoshi meant, I'm like, no, I'm not a missionary. I'm the international student that's like supposed to be here in the class. So that was a pretty awkward exchange, and it was made that much more awkward because that's the only clothes I really had. So I had to wear like a school uniform the entire time I'm studying abroad in Japan. And it turned out I was going to a public school, which is, in Japan, a public school is actually considered more prestigious than a private school, which is counterintuitive coming from American culture, where it's the opposite. And a lot of public schools here in Japan will wear casual clothes as opposed to the private schools that wear school uniforms. And so I was not made aware of that fact before I came to Japan. So that was a pretty awkward moment. I certainly prefer living in the city. The city that I'm from, I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I love Lincoln. It's an amazing place. It's very diverse. We have a university, so we have a great youth culture. But I do love getting to live in a really big city compared to my hometown. I think if I lived in a rural area in Japan, as a lot of people would probably feel the same with this sentiment, you'd really struggle maybe to look for entertainment or things to do. And there would probably be a lot of times where you feel lonely just because of the small population. And coming to Tokyo to study abroad and then getting to live in Tokyo for work, the most exciting thing about getting to live here is that every day when I walk outside of my door, I know I'm going to see something I've never seen before. I'm going to be exposed to something that I never even could imagine could exist. I know I'm probably going to say WTF to myself at least 5 times throughout the day, just because of different behavior that I witnessed, or different like costumes people are wearing. And Tokyo is a circus, but it's so exciting. And the great thing about Tokyo as well is it's not only just massive city. There's plenty of other rural places located here in the city, namely Yoyogi Park or Meiji Jingu Shrine. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds getting to live in the city. And so I certainly prefer it, and I'm very fortunate that I get to live here in Tokyo. So when it comes to dating in Japan, there's so many things to keep in mind, and I'm not a pro. Practice makes perfect, and of course I'd like to practice as much as I can before I settle down and meet as many people as I can, of course. When it comes to cultural concepts, that's always been pretty difficult. There's this cultural concept in Japan called Anmoku no Ryokai. It means tacit understanding, and that seems to be the basis of a lot of relationships here in Japan. There's so many things that are unspoken and so many things that are unsaid, and when you nail it on the head, that can kind of make your partner uncomfortable. For example, in Japanese culture, not that this has necessarily been the case for me, but in traditional Japan, there was this saying where if a guy was out on a date with a girl, or any partners, it doesn't necessarily matter. But if the partner liked the other partner, they would look up at the moon, they say, "Isn't the moon beautiful tonight?" And if the partner liked them, they would say, "Yes, it's beautiful." But if the partner didn't like them, they would say, "Oh, but the moon is so far away." And just that unspoken, even though it's verbalized, I mean, there's such an undertone there. And I think that reflects a lot of relationships in Japan, whether they're romantic or not. There's just so much going on. And so when it comes to shared experiences, you know, there's a lot of things about American culture that I want to show, you know, past dates, past girlfriends, that they haven't necessarily gotten, and they've shown me things as well, maybe, for example, when it comes to comedy. And so, you know, to kind of find those commonalities and connect on an emotional level, that has been something I've really struggled with here in Japan. But as I learn more Japanese and about Japanese culture, and as I interact with people who might be more aware of the cultural aspects of America that I'm interested in, I'm very optimistic that I'll be able to find someone that I have a lot more shared experiences with. And it's Tokyo, there's 36 million people, there's a lot of fish in the sea. I'm not too pessimistic about it. Yeah, I've had some experiences where I've been point blank, "I really like you," and they're like, "Nah, I just don't feel that way." But you know, what's interesting about those situations is they don't cut me off completely, and we're still really good friends. And there's always the possibility that we could, you know, get together, and that they're just patient about it. And there's been situations where I've, you know, been friends with a girl and then been more maybe romantically involved and evolved as well, more romantically involved, and then realize, you know, maybe we just don't necessarily connect on that level, and we can go back to being friends and actually maybe help each other find other romantic partners, or, you know, people to date as well. So I've had pretty positive experiences overall, and again, I'm pretty optimistic about it. But you know, when it comes to the situation of many things that are spoken, I'm sure that still exists between many of my friends and past partners. So something I want to express to people who are thinking about working in Japan, and this might apply to a lot of aspects of life as well, something that I heard really early on in my professional experience that has helped me is that, you know, a lot of things in life are about 20% making it happen and about just 80% letting it happen. And there's many things I wish I could control, and that 20% I do have control over, especially when it comes to work. You know, I try my best, I do what I can to be productive and you know, to contribute to my organization. But there's about 80% of the things that are out of my control, and it's my reaction that really dictates how good of an employee I am. And when it comes to relationships, it's the exact same way. I mean, you can change the person, or you can accept them for who they are, and you know, there's that 80-20 rule. So that was something that was told to me early on, and it's something I keep in mind, that, you know, you kind of just have to let things happen, and that, you know, might be the best thing. And you know, when situations are perceived as negative, you know, in the end they're not really positive or negative, they just are. You know, the rain isn't positive or negative. When it rains, the farmer's happy, but the picnickers aren't. So it's not the rain itself that's negative or positive, it's our perception of it. And there's a lot of things in Japan, you know, for example, as I talked about earlier, social pleasantries and like the superficial aspect of, you know, communicating. You know, I can perceive it as negative, but, you know, I can also perceive it as a positive thing, and that, you know, it's a way so that people don't offend each other, and that, you know, since there's a prescribed way to communicate, especially when you first meet someone, that you can kind of adhere to this harmony. It's called yote chowa, which means predetermined harmony, and it's a really important Japanese concept. So, you know, over time, I went from perceiving it as something negative to perceiving it as something positive. Another cool thing to keep in mind, though, lastly, is that, you know, actually nothing never really is, it's always becoming. So by the time I label something as being good or bad, it's already changed into something else anyway. So a lot of my views about Japan, you know, have built over the 5 years that I've been here, but Japan's changed within that 5 years. And so a lot of the opinions and a lot of the views I have about Japan are not necessarily relevant anymore. And so I have to be willing to change my opinion and stay observant and know that Japanese culture is changing as well, and therefore my opinion should according to that.